Alright guys, so today we are going to look at causes of the Great Depression, and this is something I'm sure a topic you all have been familiar with, but just to start out, we are going to look at, again, the causes of the Great Depression. So our objectives, we are going to discuss the weakness in the economy in the 1920s and explain how the stock market crash contributed to the coming of the Great Depression. And lastly, we are going to describe how the Great Depression spread overseas. We're going to be able to do all of these things by the end of this PowerPoint. Alright, terms and people. You know the drill. Herbert Hoover. He was the former Secretary of Commerce and the Republican candidate for president in 1928. Just like we've talked about before, typically before someone runs for the presidency, they start to build their name, just like we saw with Teddy Roosevelt. They begin to build their names with other positions in government right before they run for president. Speculation was when investors gambled that stock prices were going to rise. Black Tuesday was October 24th, 1929, and that was the day that the stock market crashed, right? The day it plummeted. The business cycle is the periodic expansion and contraction of the economy, the ups and downs. The Great Depression is the collapse of the United States and world economies that began in 1929. And the Hawley-Smoot tariff was a high protective tariff passed in June of 1930 that contributed to a worldwide depression, okay? So, many of you know, I'm sure, that we experienced a depression in the 1920s, in the late 1920s, early 30s, but what we're going to hone in today is how that, in effect, created a world depression. So, how did prosperity of the 20s give way to the Great Depression? During the 1920s, many Americans enjoyed what seemed like an endless era of prosperity, right? We talked about that when we were talking about the economy. They thought it was only going to get better. It couldn't get worse. But in 1929, the stock market crashed. Production fell, unemployment rose, and the economy went into a period of dramatic decline. Years after the Great Depression began, periodic contraction was seen as a part of the business cycle. In the 1928 presidential race, the Republican Party was very confident. The Republicans took credit for the strong economy. Their presidential candidate was Herbert Hoover. He believed in voluntary cooperation between business and labor. All right, guys, so keep in mind, right now we're talking about the 1928 presidential race, before the stock market crashed in 1929, okay? Despite Hoover's confidence, some saw the signs of weakness in the economy. The agricultural sector was in trouble. Rural farmers produced huge surpluses of food that depressed prices. That's when they had too much and they couldn't get rid of it, so they had to lower the price to get rid of it. Farmers could not afford to buy goods or repay the loans they took out for their farms. Easy credit installment buying led people to purchase goods they couldn't pay for. We talked about that when we talked about the installment plan, right? Remember layaway and how you put a little down and you promised to pay it over time, but eventually they didn't pay it and they lost all the money they put in and they didn't get whatever they were putting up. By 1929, Americans had racked up more than $6 billion in personal debt, more than double the 1921 level. They just kept spending because they didn't see the economy going bad. Rising wages masked or hid an uneven distribution of wealth, okay? While their wages rose 8%, the output increased by 32%, or that production. As a result, worker incomes rose modestly, while rich investor incomes skyrocketed, okay? So what they're seeing is, although the workers' pay is slightly increasing, because of that slight increase, we see that their productivity and how happy, essentially, they are. Typically, the happier you are, the harder you work, so your production increases, which is kind of what we see going on. They're happier because they have higher wages, so their production is increasing. However, they're producing a lot more, 32% more, almost 4 times as much as their wage has increased. Thus, that off balance then goes to the investors or the capitalists who have put the money forth. Therefore, they are making tremendous gains, much more than the 8% they're paying, or 8% increase they're paying their workers. Until September of 1929, the stock market continued to rise. Many people borrowed money to buy that stock, assuming those prices were going to continue to go up. Remember, if you see your neighbor being able to buy 2 or 3 Model Ts and you find out that they're doing it in the stock market, you started investing and that sort of spread. Some economists feared that the stocks were overpriced, though. So those people who were skilled in economies and how economies work, they started to sort of see that something was going to happen, right? Things are getting overpriced. It's getting a little out of hand. Something's going to go down. On October 29th, the stock market went into a free fall as investors tried to sell at absolutely any price. 16 million shares were sold on Black Tuesday. Billions of dollars were lost in a few hours alone, guys. Billions. Many who bought stocks on the margin were wiped out. The Great Crash was a hallmark of the nation's business cycle. The economy periodically grows and then contracts, okay? It's an up-down, like a roller coaster. In growth periods, workers are hired, wages rise, and demand for product increases. In contraction periods, workers are fired, wages drop, and demand for product falls.